On my planet, nobody wakes up and immediately starts obeying strangers. But on Earth, humans do this all the time, and the strangest part is that most of them do not even describe it as obedience. They call it normal life. They say things like, "That's the law," "That's just how things work," or "You have to." When I first arrived here, I thought humans were free. They looked free. They moved around, made choices, argued with each other, complained about leaders, mocked authority, and acted like nobody really controlled them. But the longer I watched, the more obvious it became that almost every part of human life is shaped by rules created by other humans long before the individual is even born. And before we go further, subscribe to the channel and like the video if you enjoy looking at human life from the outside. And comment below with the rule that controls your life the most, because I have noticed something fascinating about humans. Everyone thinks they are fighting a different problem, but most of the time they are all trapped in the same system, wearing different clothes. To understand why humans let other people control their lives, you have to go back far before governments, offices, taxes, or passports. You have to go back to when life was much simpler and much more dangerous. Early human groups did not start with leaders because they loved power. They started with leaders because survival is easier when somebody decides fast. When food is scarce, when there is danger nearby, when another group might attack, when the weather is turning, when the hunt pose wrong, endless debate is not very efficient. In that kind of world, humans naturally looked for the person with experience, strength, social influence, calm under pressure, or the ability to keep the group together. Not always the strongest, not always the loudest, but usually someone the group believed could reduce chaos. That is the beginning of the whole thing. Leadership started as a practical solution. Someone needed to make decisions. Someone needed to settle disputes. Someone needed to organize the hunt, the movement, the defense, the sharing, the timing. In small groups, that kind of authority was probably much more personal than what humans deal with now. You obeyed someone because you knew them, trusted them, feared them, or needed them. It was direct, immediate, simple, but that simple arrangement planted a seed that never really disappeared. Humans learned very early that order often feels safer than total freedom. And once a species learns that, a lot of things become possible. As human groups got bigger, settled down, built villages, stored food, defended territory, and developed more permanent ways of living, leadership also became more permanent. It was no longer just who should guide us through this problem. It slowly became who has the right to decide. That is a very different question, because once leadership becomes attached to land, resources, conflict, inheritance, law, religion, or social status, it stops being just useful and starts becoming structure. The leader is no longer only solving emergencies. The leader becomes part of everyday life. And that is where humans began building the long staircase that led to the world they live in now. At first, leadership probably felt natural. In some ways, it still does. Humans seem deeply wired to organize themselves into groups, and groups almost always drift toward patterns of influence. Some people lead, some follow, some negotiate, some resist the leader, some protect the group, some simply try to stay out of trouble. This happens everywhere. In tribes, kingdoms, schools, companies, online communities, families, even friend groups deciding where to eat. Humans are very creative, but one thing they repeat over and over is this: when enough people gather together, some kind of hierarchy usually appears. On my planet, that would be seen as a warning sign. On Earth, it's practically a hobby. But here's where it gets more serious.
Once humans formed larger societies, they could no longer rely only on trust, memory, or personal reputation. A village can function on face-to-face relationships. A kingdom cannot. A country definitely cannot. Large groups need systems, rules, records, officials, roles, consequences. At that point, leadership stops being just a person and becomes an institution. And institutions are much harder to argue with because they don't need charisma, they only need permanence. That is when control becomes much more powerful. A single ruler can be hated, a system can survive hatred, a king can die, a bureaucracy can continue asking for paperwork forever. That is one of the funniest and darkest things about human civilization. Control became stronger when it stopped depending on one powerful person and started living inside structures. Laws, offices, courts, borders, taxes, permits, schools, armies, documents. By then, humans were no longer just following leaders, they were following systems built by generations of strangers. And of course, humans did not accept this only because they were forced. That would be too simple. Humans accepted control because control often came packaged with something they desperately wanted: security, protection from violence, protection from chaos, protection from uncertainty. The promise was always attractive. Follow the rules and life becomes more stable. Accept authority and maybe your family survives the winter. Pay what's demanded and maybe the roads are safer. Obey the law and maybe conflict becomes less random. Again and again, humans traded small pieces of freedom for some version of order. Sometimes that trade made sense, sometimes it still does. That's what makes this complicated. Because the truth is, humans didn't build leadership and control for no reason. A world with no authority at all is not automatically peaceful. It can be brutal, unstable, and exhausting. Large societies do need coordination. They need common rules. They need ways to settle disputes and organize life between millions of strangers who don't know each other personally. So the problem was never simply that humans created leaders. The problem is what happened next.
What happened next is that the systems kept growing. The leader became the ruler. The ruler became the state. The state built administration. Administration built bureaucracy. Bureaucracy built routine. Routine entered everyday life so deeply that most humans stopped seeing it as control. They just called it reality. Wake up on time, show identification, follow procedures, ask permission, pay bills, respect deadlines, stay in approved areas, use approved forms, learn approved history, apply through approved channels, work within approved structures. It is an incredible achievement, really. Humans created a world where millions of people can be guided without someone having to stand over each one with a weapon. Now, to be fair, force still exists, but modern human control often works best when it does not look like force. That is the genius of it. The system does not always need to threaten you directly. It only needs to make disobedience inconvenient, expensive, embarrassing, or exhausting. Miss a payment, ignore a form, break a rule, refuse a process. Suddenly, doors close. Access disappears, problems multiply. So many humans obey not because they admire authority, but because the cost of resisting it is built into daily life. And then there is the social side, which is somehow even more effective. Because not all control comes from governments or leaders at the top. A huge amount comes from sideways pressure: family, culture, school, workplace, community, reputation, shame, expectations. Humans enforce invisible rules on each other constantly. What success should look like, what age you should marry, what kind of job is respectable, how much money is enough, what is embarrassing, what is ambitious, what is normal.
A person can spend their entire life obeying rules nobody officially wrote down, simply because they were absorbed from the group. So now the average human is being shaped from two directions at once, from above by institutions and from around them by society. Laws tell them what they must not do. Culture tells them what they should want. And the combination is very powerful. One controls behavior, the other controls desire. That is why so many humans feel trapped even when nobody is visibly forcing them. They are not just dealing with one leader, one government, or one rule. They are dealing with layer upon layer of control built over thousands of years. Biological instincts toward group organization, early survival-based leadership, settled life, property, territory, law, religion, states, bureaucracy, social pressure, economic dependence. By the time a modern human is old enough to question any of this, they are already deep inside it. Their name is in systems. Their money is in systems. Their education came through systems. Their job depends on systems. Their future is shaped by systems. So even when they disagree, they usually keep moving. And I think that is the part many humans do not like to admit. They like the language of freedom, and I understand why. It sounds good, it feels dignified. But most people are not moving through open space. They are moving through approved paths. Some paths are useful, some are necessary, some are unfair, some are outdated, some are absurd, but all of them shape behavior. Humans do not just live their lives, they manage their position inside systems built by other humans. The strange thing is that many of them only notice this when the system stops cooperating, when the salary is not enough, when the paperwork fails, when a law changes, when they lose access, when the price of living rises, when a leader they never trusted suddenly affects their daily life in a very direct way. That is when the illusion breaks. That is when humans remember that so much of what feels personal is actually structural. So why do humans let others control their lives? Because in the beginning, leadership helped them survive. Because order felt better than chaos. Because groups naturally drift toward hierarchy. Because larger societies needed coordination. Because systems made control scalable. Because obedience often became the cheapest option. And because over time, control became so normal that most humans stopped experiencing it as control at all. On my planet, that would be the unsettling realization. On Earth, it's called growing up. And maybe that's the funniest part. Humans spend years trying to become independent, only to discover that adulthood mostly means learning which rules you can bend, which ones you must obey, and which ones will follow you for the rest of your life.